oh man, I did it again. I tried to ride my big bike, but I just keep getting pulled back to that freaking trail bike. And I know I sound like a broken record at this point, but if you haven't given these trail bikes a try, I really think you're missing out. Today, I'm going to talk about what it is about these trail bikes that just keep me coming back for more. I'm also going to talk about the downsides of other dirt bikes and explain whether or not you should buy a different bike or just stick with the one you have. So sit back, relax, and grab your favorite snack. Let's get into it. Currently, I have 2 dirt bikes. Well, I used to have 3, but my 2016 YZ250F got stolen, so now I'm down to 2. But to make this crystal clear, I'll tell you a little bit about why I got each bike in the first place, because I think getting an inside look into my thought process might actually help those of you who are trying to figure out what bike you want to get. I've been riding dirt bikes for over 20 years, mostly motocross until I recently gave off-road riding a shot last year. And that's the reason I ended up on a YZ125 two-stroke. No, not because of off-road riding, but because I was riding motocross. So I got the 125 when I was much younger. I was just moving up from my CR85, so the 125 was my first big bike, and I've had it ever since. It's been great for teaching me fundamental skills like proper clutch and throttle control, being in the right gear and RPM range, and learning how to keep my momentum up throughout the turns. But a few years later, I ended up getting the YZ250F. Now this is a 4-stroke motocross bike, which is the same as what the pros in the 250 class in motocross and supercross are riding. This bike was vastly different than the 2-stroke 125. New concepts like engine braking had to be learned. I mean, man, that was strange. And also, the extremely linear power delivery was such a neat thing to experience, coming from the very narrow power band on the 125. See, I got the YZ250F because I was pretty much only riding motocross at the time, and I wanted something with a bit more power than my 125. Now, fast forward a good many years since then, my riding schedule actually slowed down quite a bit as I graduated high school and I started figuring out how the hell to actually live in the real world for the first time. And at one point, I pretty much stopped riding altogether for probably about 2 years. When I first decided to start this YouTube channel, I had the urge to get back into riding, but I thought I'd give street bikes a try. So I got my motorcycle permit and I ended up buying a supermoto. Now you can go back and look at my first few videos on this channel and you'll actually see me riding around on that bike. And I really thought I'd be going around exploring all the crevices and off limits areas around my city. I'm really into like urban exploring. I think it's pretty cool, and just finding different unique areas. I grew up in a rural area, but I moved to the city, so I mean there's tons of places to explore in the city, so I thought a street bike, a supermoto would be the perfect way to do that. That sounded really exciting to me, but honestly, I quickly started to realize that street riding wasn't really for me. See, at that time, I also began teaching my girlfriend how to ride a dirt bike. Now, I got her started on a vintage Yamaha LT100 since it was the least intimidating bike my dad and I had in our garage. But the problem was, the thing just continued having issues. One time, it wouldn't start, so I said screw it, and I let my girlfriend ride my YZ250F. Now, obviously, this bike was much taller and infinitely more powerful than the little vintage 100, but she had been getting the hang of the clutch and had a ton of room in this big open field to ride, so I wasn't really too worried. But then I realized I made a huge mistake. We were just wrapping up for the day and she was killing it, so I told her, why don't you just ride it back down to the garage? So she followed me down to the garage, and just as she was pulling in towards the garage, I looked at her, and through the helmet, I saw something change in her eyes. And I knew in that moment exactly what was happening. And I also realized that there was nothing I could do about it. See, she forgot to pull in the clutch, and instead of grabbing the brake or letting off the gas, she twisted the throttle even further, which happens to everyone at one point, and she whiskey throttled and she went careening into this compost bin. Now, there was like a pickup truck and a trailer, and she somehow just perfectly split the difference between those two things. It was honestly incredible, but in that moment, I knew that I had really messed up, and it was not good, because if you've ever whiskey throttled a dirt bike, you know that is an extremely scary and nerve-wracking feeling. Everyone's done it at some point, but you never get comfortable with it. It's always takes you by surprise, and it's a really scary feeling, especially if you're on a bike that it's a little bit taller than you're used to, like she was, and if you're on a bike that's way more powerful than you're used to, which she was also. So it was just not good. And on the drive back home, I had decided I needed to get a different bike. A 250 race bike was just not suitable for a beginner to learn on. Like I said, of course, everyone whiskey throttles at some point, but it's way less of an issue on something more tame and more suited for beginner riders. So, not long after that, I went right back to the dealership where I got my Supermoto, and I traded that bike in for a 2024 CRF 250F. This is the perfect bike for my girlfriend to learn on. Has a shorter seat height to make the rider feel confident when learning the balance of the bike and while figuring out the clutch, and a nice smooth power delivery, which does a great job at making the rider feel in control of what's going on. But here's the kicker. I actually ended up liking the CRF for myself way more than I expected. I mean, from the moment I hopped on the thing and started ripping around my track, I knew this was going to be fun. I mean, it's like a big pit bike. That's basically what it is. So of course it's going to be fun. And it's not about going blisteringly fast or tackling huge obstacles or anything like that, because these bikes are about play. They're about fun. Now, I've made plenty of videos on the CRF 250F, so if you're interested in learning more about the bike specifically, I'd recommend checking out the playlist on my channel. But something strange keeps happening the more I ride this bike. See, I started riding off-road way more this past year, more than I've ever done in my whole time riding dirt bikes before that. I barely even touched the motocross tracks at all this past year. My motocross spec bikes, the YZ125 two-stroke and the YZ250F, before it got stolen of course, they got the job done in the woods, but they don't make it easy, I'll tell you that. And it's kind of like taming a bull. You know, they're just bucking you all around, they're not so easy to lug, or they're just completely spinning the rear wheel and breaking traction loose. Now that's not to say that they can't be modified to be more tailored to woods riding, or that my technique couldn't get any better either. I mean, I definitely could afford to get better at throttle control and clutch control in the woods. But every time I hop back on the trail bike, the CRF 250F, after riding those motocross bikes, I notice it immediately. It's just way more fun. I mean, it happened to me again this very last time I went riding. I was out testing my new camera on this little GP loop I had built, and I started out on the 125. Now I ended up getting to this one little slightly technical hill climb. It required a sort of like short off camber climb, and then a slight turn or like pivot to the right at this shelf, and then a little hill probably like a couple bike lengths long through some branches to get up to the top. It wasn't super difficult, but it was a little bit technical. I made it up the first part pretty easily on the 125, but once I got to the shelf, I turned the bike and I tried to get up that short little steep part, and that's when I started having issues. See, it was part rider error and part bike error. Now, like I said, I'm well aware that my technique could be better, but also the bike really was way more jumpy. It was breaking traction way easier, which made it difficult to crawl up and out of that section in a like slow and controlled manner. Like I said, this could be remedied with my technique, and yes, I'm not really blaming the bike. I'm just giving you like the average experience of riding it. Riding 125 is difficult to do. I think that's why it's such a great teaching tool, but sometimes that doesn't make it as fun to ride in certain scenarios. So I actually ended up finding a little coolant leak a bit later on my 125, so I went back to the garage, I got on the CRF 250F, and I found myself back at that same little hill climb. And what do you know? It tractored up that thing like nobody's business. I mean, it was so easy. I didn't even really have to modulate the clutch at all. It just freaking tractored up the thing because the throttle delivery on the 250F, the CRF 250F, is just naturally smooth. That's how it gets output from the engine. So you don't even have to like really do much with your throttle. It kind of makes it easy. And you know, like if you're trying to learn, you're trying to go faster, you might want to challenge yourself and put yourself on a more difficult bike to ride, like a small bore two-stroke or something. But if you're just out there to have fun, like, yeah, the trail bike makes it a lot easier to do certain things, especially like this example. Now, of course, there are times when having that snappy power and the lighter feeling of the 125, there are times when that does come in handy, but the majority of the time, at least for me, the CRF is just way more fun to ride. Now, another thing is the bikes just run. Like, of course, maintenance is something you have to do on any bike, and obviously things break occasionally, but time after time, my 125 is sitting back at the garage with some issue, like right now, and I end up hopping on the CRF instead because it's there, you turn it on, you hit the e-start, and it goes. It might come off as surprising, but I like riding my dirt bikes more than working on them, so this is certainly a point for the trail bikes. Now, like I said, obviously they still do require maintenance, but much less maintenance and at much further stretched out intervals than race bikes do. Now, if you already have a race bike, no, I'm not telling you to go out and sell your race bike for a trail bike. I fully subscribe to the idea of just riding whatever you have at the moment, because any bike is better than no bike, and I think a lot of times people really do spend way too much time searching for that perfect bike when it just doesn't exist. I mean, I do this all the time, not just with dirt bikes, but with any product. I spend way too much time analyzing, in that analysis paralysis, and I really should just buy the thing that I kind of have an inkling that I need, right? And then just use it, because I probably had it right the first time. But obviously do your research. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying if you already have a bike, if you already have something and you have the ability to get out there and ride, you don't need to go and buy a brand new bike. But if you do have the opportunity to ride a trail bike, to try one out, I highly recommend it. And if you have the means to buy a second bike, I really think a trail bike like the CRF 250F is a great option. I mean, you can ride them yourself as play bikes, and they also make really good spare bikes to have for if your friends come over and you want to teach them how to ride, or you just have some buddies that already know how to ride and you want to give them another bike to, tag along with you or something like that. And that's why I think you should ride trail bikes if you have the ability. They're extremely fun. Now, if you watch this whole video and you're still confused as to what the hell a trail bike is, I'd recommend watching the video on screen now. In it, I explain the differences between 3 different types of dirt bike engines and how not all 250s are created equal.